Hey everybody, I have a big topic to tackle today. It's something that I had on my list for a future video, but thanks to a recent question from subscriber W8589, I decided to bump it to the top of the list. And the more I thought about it, the more excited I got about it. So today I'm going to be talking about my preferred and recommended Dark Tower reading order. So as every constant reader knows, the Dark Tower series is sort of the cornerstone, the nexus of the entire Stephen King literary universe. And it encompasses 8 novels, 7 core novels, and 1 supplementary novel. And the series can be read in that order, very, very clearly in that order, with absolutely no problem. But if you're like me, you picked up the final 3 books in 2003, 2004, and took a look at also by Stephen King, and it says down here, Dark Tower related in bold. And we're like, wait, what? How many books do I have to read to get the entire Dark Tower experience? Well, over the years, I have read all of those books, and some of the books, in my opinion, are just core, absolutely integral to the overall Dark Tower understanding, the overall Dark Tower experience, and some are tangential at best. So in my opinion, there are 3 basic types of supplemental Dark Tower related Stephen King novels and stories. There are the ones that expand our core understanding of the universe. So novels like Insomnia or Black House fall under this category. There are also stories like It or From a Buick 8 that are bolded on that list that are tangentially related in some way, but do not fundamentally alter our understanding and experience of the Dark Tower series. And then the third type are what I call Dark Tower character origin stories. So for instance, the main villain in the Dark Tower series is the same character as the main villain in The Eyes of the Dragon, for instance. And you could read The Eyes of the Dragon completely independently of the Dark Tower series, and it's basically like a previous adventure or misadventure of that character, which is really interesting, and it does add a little bit of nuance to the Dark Tower series, but does not fundamentally impact our understanding of the Dark Tower series in any way. I also want to clarify up front that when I mention the Gunslinger, I am not referring to the original cut released in 1982. I am referring to the revised and expanded version released in 2003. So it took Stephen King over 30 years to finish the Dark Tower series. And along the way, he was kind of figuring out the story as he went. So the original cut of The Gunslinger from 1982 contains 6 stories that were fixed up and turned into a standalone book that were written over a decade of Stephen King's life. And then by the time he reached the end of the series in the early 2000s, he realized that this book did not provide new readers to the series with the smoothest entry point. By the time he finished the series, he realized that it had kind of drifted away from what this book originally presented, which only makes sense over so many years of working on the same story. So what he did is he went back and he revised and he expanded the first novel, The Gunslinger, which was released in a standalone edition in 2003 to coincide with the publication of the final 3 books in the series. So in this video, when I'm talking about The Gunslinger, Book 1, I am talking about the revised and expanded edition, which in my opinion has rendered the original completely obsolete. This book is a much smoother, much more well-rounded entry into the series for new readers or people who are revisiting the series for the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, whatever time. So one additional bit of information before we really get started with the lists is that in my mind, there's a preferred reading order for your first trip to the tower, and then a slightly different reading order for your 2nd, 3rd, 4th, whatever revisits to the tower. And I'm going to talk about both of those today. Both lists include 13 different novels or novellas, but in slightly different orders. The first list emphasizes sort of a roundness of experience, and the second list prioritizes more of a chronological approach to the material. And then to make the experience even longer, I have sort of a mini list of 3 titles that I recommend reading in between your first and subsequent visits to the tower. So I do want to say before we get too far into this that you totally, absolutely can just read the core 7 Dark Tower novels and have a completely fine, well-rounded, interesting, in-depth experience with just those 7 books. You don't even have to read book 8 or book 4.5, Win Through the Keyhole. You can just read the core 7, be totally okay, and then be done. You also could, if you chose to, read the core 7 plus Win Through the Keyhole plus every other single thing that's in bold on this reading list, and also have a fantastic overall experience. But this video is based on the assumption that you will want a slightly more well-rounded experience than just the core 7 Dark Tower novels, but also probably not want to make the huge investment of time needed to read the core series plus everything else in bold on that list. One bit of advice, something that I always share with new people who are visiting the tower for the first time, is that Book one is a lot different than the other books in the series, in that it's kind of dry and it's sparsely populated. And while it does have some really interesting set pieces, it doesn't have sort of the propulsive action of later books in the series. I've known lots of people who have said, I want to read the Dark Tower series, and then they finish book 1 and they're like, what the heck was that? I am no longer interested in this series. I didn't really know what that was. I didn't care for it. And I always tell them, please continue, because things really pick up in book 2, which comes next in my preferred reading order, The Drawing of the Three. This remains my favorite of the entire series. It's action-packed. It's really, really funny. By far the funniest book of the entire series, which sounds like a strange reason to recommend something like, oh, you should read the Dark Tower series. It's hilarious. But The Drawing of the Three was very, very entertaining. And if you make it through The Drawing of the Three, and you still really, really don't care for the Dark Tower series, there's a good chance, sorry to say, that it just may not be your thing. And that's totally okay. Even for fans of Stephen King, the Dark Tower series is not for everybody. My grandma was a hardcore, constant Stephen King reader, and she was like, nope, not interested in that Western nonsense, as she called it. So then we move right into book 3, The Wastelands. So this is another classic in the series, but unlike Drawing of the Three, which takes place predominantly in America, in our world, The Wastelands takes place predominantly in Roland's world, in Midworld. And it covers a lot of ground, and it has some really, really interesting and memorable set pieces. So to start off the reading list, you have the revised and expanded book 1, book 2, and book 3. Bam, 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 in order, pretty straightforward, easy peasy. But then in the mid-90s, Stephen King published the novel Insomnia, which on its surface is an unrelated story about the adventures or misadventures of octogenarians in Derry, Maine, who are trying to save the world. But it also just so happens to be one of the core supplemental Dark Tower novels, in that it introduces the concept of like different levels of the multiverse, like the idea that there are different layers and levels. It introduces the uber overall big bad of the Dark Tower series, the Crimson King. And in fact, in Insomnia, we actually get closer and learn more about the Crimson King, I would say, than we do in the entire Dark Tower series. And it also introduces a character who goes on to become vital in the Dark Tower series overall. After Insomnia, we move on to book 4, Wizard and Glass. And the thing about Wizard and Glass is that it moves the core story ahead very, very little overall, in that hundreds and hundreds of pages, the absolute core hundreds of pages of this really long novel is an epic flashback sequence to Roland's childhood. And while at first the idea of a like 600-page flashback that doesn't progress the story forward toward the Dark Tower in any way is really frustrating, it is ultimately one of the most beautiful things that Stephen King has ever written. Wizard and Glass is an absolute pinnacle of Stephen King's career overall. So there's a pretty clear line, a pretty clear gap between book 4, Wizard and Glass, and book 5, Wolves of the Calla. Not the least of which is that book 5, 6, and 7 were written continuously and published back to back. And also because of the epic flashback nature of Wizard and Glass, it's the perfect time to kind of step back from the series and pick up some additional supplemental material. So after Wizard and Glass, I highly recommend picking up the novella, The Little Sisters of Eluria. It first appeared in the collection Legends, but is most commonly found in the collection Everything's Eventual. So Little Sisters of Eluria slots neatly in between the flashback sequence of Wizard and Glass and the events of book 1 in the series, The Gunslinger, and relates an adventure of Roland before he has caught the trail of the man in black who we meet in Dark Tower 1. After Little Sisters of Eluria, pick up The Wind Through the Keyhole. So this is the supplemental Dark Tower novel that was published several years after the completion of the series and is intended to slot in between books 4 and 5. So Wind Through the Keyhole features a lot of at least structural similarities to Wizard and Glass, in that it features a brief wraparound story that moves the core group of the series forward just a little bit, but primarily features a flashback sequence to Roland's youth. It is not necessary to read The Wind Through the Keyhole. If you want to just read the core 7 books, like I mentioned before, that's totally fine. But The Wind Through the Keyhole does slot nicely in between books 4 and 5 and just adds some additional detail and color to Roland's world, which is always interesting and it's always welcome.
And now a word about our sponsor.
For over 20 years, StephenKingCollector.com has been the internet's go-to source for all things Stephen King. From breaking news and real-time sales updates from around the internet, to forums where you can connect with like-minded collectors, to information about first editions as well as highly sought-after and rare limited editions, StephenKingCollector.com has it all. Additionally, the collector sells custom slipcases to protect your most valuable and cherished treasures. The collector now offers book sales directly through the website and an all-around upgraded and improved payment system. With improvements and updates happening on a regular basis, there's always something new to see and experience at StephenKingCollector.com. The link to the site is in the description for this video. You should go check it out. You'll be glad you did. Following, we move on with the short novel Low Men in Yellow Coats, which is featured in the collection Hearts in Atlantis. Low Men in Yellow Coats, like Insomnia, is another kind of slice of life story that is enjoyable on its own merits, completely removed from the Dark Tower, but which, like Insomnia, fundamentally expands our knowledge of the Dark Tower series and what is going on in that self-contained literary universe. We learn of the Low Men who serve as minions of the Crimson King. We learn of breakers. Following Low Men in Yellow Coats, we move right on into Dark Tower 5, Wolves of the Calla, which again features the core group and starts the beginning, like barrel ahead race to the end of the series. So while Wolves of the Calla, like other novels in the series, doesn't move the quartet all that much farther toward their ultimate goal of the Dark Tower, it does dramatically expand our overall knowledge of the Dark Tower universe and what is going on, the nitty-gritty of what's actually happening to Roland's world. It's another fantastically written, gripping, imaginative story that is yet another highlight of this overall highlight of Stephen King's entire career. Wolves of the Calla blends right into book 6 of the Dark Tower series, Song of Susannah. So Song of Susannah, in my opinion, is where the rubber really meets the road. We've spent all of these novels sort of gaining perspective and context and backstory about what exactly is happening and has happened in Roland's world, and what the quartet will need to do to kind of reverse it or stop it or try to save it. All of that comes to bear in Song of Susannah. So even though Song of Susannah barrels straight ahead into the final book in the series, The Dark Tower, I recommend taking a final detour, a final break from the Dark Tower series, and picking up the Stephen King and Peter Straub collaboration, Black House. Without giving too much away, there are elements of Black House that come to bear on the quartet, even though they don't necessarily realize it, and also the Crimson King. Black House, in my opinion, is a masterpiece. It's an absolutely brutal and dark novel, but it is so brilliant and so well written, and it further expands our knowledge of the Dark Tower universe. And even though Song of Susannah blurs right into the Dark Tower, chronologically, Black House fits really well in between the two. So after Song, Black House. So after Black House, Book 7, The Dark Tower. This is where Stephen King brings it all home. And then sort of as a special coda to the entire series, I recommend the 60-ish page novella, that's U-R, which was originally published as a standalone just on the Amazon Kindle, but which was later collected in the Bazaar of Bad Dreams. I'm not going to say much about other than that it does expand our fundamental understanding of the Dark Tower series. So in summary and in review, for your first trip to the Dark Tower, I recommend going in the following order. Dark Tower 1, The Gunslinger, Revised and Expanded Edition. Dark Tower 2, The Drawing of the Three. Dark Tower 3, The Wastelands. Insomnia. Dark Tower 4, Wizard and Glass. The Little Sisters of Eluria. Dark Tower 4.5, The Wind Through the Keyhole. The novella Low Men in Yellow Coats. Dark Tower 5, Wolves of the Calla. Dark Tower 6, Song of Susannah. Black House. Dark Tower 7, The Dark Tower. And finally, So assuming that you want to keep going and learn more about the characters featured in the Dark Tower series after you've completed the series, I highly recommend the following 3 novels that all serve as kind of prequels or origin stories for certain characters featured in the series. And those are Salem's Lot, The Eyes of the Dragon, and The Stand. So the reading list for subsequent visits to the tower is essentially identical to the first one, with the difference that it pulls out Little Sisters of Eluria and puts it at the beginning chronologically as an entry point into Roland's world, because it does take place before the events of Book 1, The Gunslinger. Chronologically speaking, the flashback sequence in Wizard and Glass would actually come first, but because of the lengthy wraparound sequence in that book, it can't be separated. It has to be Book 4, and it has to come in that order. But Little Sisters of Eluria is really cleanly pulled out as a prequel that takes place before Dark Tower 1. So on subsequent visits to the tower, the reading order is as follows. Little Sisters of Eluria, The Revised and Expanded Gunslinger, Drawing of the Three, Wastelands, Insomnia, Wizard and Glass, Wind Through the Keyhole, Low Men in Yellow Coats, Wolves of the Calla, Song of Susannah, Black House, The Dark Tower, and And of course, if you want to, if you're really, really curious, you can go back to that list of Dark Tower related works in bold that's featured in the last 3 books of the series, and you can pick up things like Rose Matter, From a Buick 8, Desperation, The Regulators, go to town, go for it. So I hope this video has been helpful. I hope it has been interesting and entertaining. Do you agree with my take? Do you agree with my listing? Is there anything that I left off that you would highly recommend adding to the list? And if so, why? Let me know in the comments. So this video has been a long time coming. I've done a lot of thinking about this. Like Santa Claus, I made my list and I checked it twice. And I really appreciate W8589 for kind of the poke, kind of the prod, the question that inspired me to put this video at the top of the list. It was a lot of work, but it was a lot of fun as well. So thank you, as always, to channel sponsor Thomas over at skcollector.com. Thank you to channel members Ken, Mark, Nick, Tom, and Steve for your special support. And thank you to you, the viewers, the subscribers, for supporting me, for supporting the channel. I really, really appreciate it. As always, if you have a more in-depth question or you want to share some photos of a recent acquisition or just something that you're curious about, feel free to reach out to me at skfirsteditions@gmail.com. I always look forward to hearing from people, and I always try to respond as quickly as I can. But for now, wherever you are in the world, I hope you take care of yourselves, and I will talk to you later. Bye.